Good day, Ghana. With the repeal of the criminal libel law and the proliferation of media houses dotted across the country, and the pride of playing host to World Freedom Day, today we ask, does a journalist feel safe in their line of duty? There couldn't have been a better person to help us discuss this issue than a senior broadcaster with over 2 decades of experience in broadcasting. I welcome Mr. Alfred Hughes. Sir, thank you so much for making time.
Nice meeting you today, but
yes, sir. Alfred, you've done the business of journalism for quite a long time. Of course, you cut your teeth at GBC. If I should ask you this simple question, is the journalism profession a career that is respected by Ghanaians, just like law or medicine?
It's a highly respectable and respectful profession, if you ask me. And I wouldn't pretend that it's probably the most respectable profession in respect to the two that you have actually outlined.
Yes,
and I can give you reasons to that. Journalism is described as the fourth estate of the realm. If you try to delineate the three arms of government, that is the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary, we have the media, which is said to be the fourth estate of the realm, the Inky fraternity. They are supposed to hold, people in public service accountable, and as a matter of fact, try to set the agenda for people to really do what is expected of them and contribute their quota towards national development. And I would like to give you a quote by one African president who lost an election, that he lost the elections because he lost the media. And I can also give another quote, John McCain, who actually contested with Obama, that when communication in journalism ceases, there is darkness, and after darkness, there is chaos, unquote. So these two quotations go to juxtapose or emphasize the importance of media as far as a country's development is concerned in Africa and the world over.
We shall soon delve into...
maybe recount that in two segments. First, I'll start with what happened
even before the white people came.
Yes.
And we had the Gongon Bita,
yes,
who was more of a journalist, announcing the chief's, decrees.
Yeah.
All throughout our history, how has information been disseminated?
Yeah, I'll take you way back. Information was disseminated to the citizenry through either what they call it, the family household, through what you call the Ohene, the Odikro, or what you call the Omahene. The Omahene being the paramount chief, the Odikro being the chief of a town, and maybe the Ohene being the chief over a small amalgamation of smaller villages. Right, and this one was done through the Gongon Bita. Right, the Gongon Bita will go and tell them about what the chief wants them to know, and just like what happened in the Greco-Roman history. They met at a public square, and the Roman king sat in state, and whatever there was as far as political administration was concerned was actually told the plebeians, because when you drew the line of aristocracy, we have the royal family, then we have the aristocracy, they have the middle class, before you had the plebeians, or what they call the commoners. In the same vein, when it comes to traditional or customary political administration in an amalgamated society where we have towns, like what we have the and Asante Kingdom, the Omahini, who is the paramount chief, like in those days, Osei-Tutu,
Yes, sir.
would have his linguists.
Okay.
We have other elders. Then going down, we have the page boy, what we call, I've forgotten the name in Akan. There's an Akan tradition.
Yeah.
Right. Then you have the Gongong Bita. If there was a very important message to be disseminated to the society, the Gongong Bita went out and beat the Gongong and disseminated information to the people. Now, there are also drums. If there was something that the chief wanted to summon his elders, the drums were beating. So the chief should meet his elders. If he wanted to also meet the council of elders together with the commoners, so to speak, then this is the way we disseminated information. But, I mean, if you fast forward to the colonial period, everything changed. And as a matter of fact, in 31st July 1936, the first broadcast station was established, which was known as the Radio ZOY, which is a small transmitting station at Old State House. This transmitted basically news from the British government and some kind of entertainment and social programs were held. But basically, all those programs were produced and transmitted. So it's a rediffusion through the rediffusion boxes.
BBC, the
Yes.
BBC didn't exist at that time.
Yeah, the BBC existed at that time
1936.
in 1936.
But there was no technology to do simulcasting from Bush House in London.
No. So it was just recast. Then people heard the news from rediffusion boxes, and we had what we call Governor Hudson. Arnold Hudson, who was nicknamed the Sunshine Governor, because he brought a lot of infrastructural development with the help of a British engineer. The first station was established in Sierra Leone, Freetown, right? Then a year afterwards, the second was established in the Gold Coast, now Ghana, right? Then after some time, the British Broadcasting Commission was actually established. That expanded the transmitter system. That was the time some indigenous Ghanaians were sent to America, to Britain, to learn the art and the science of broadcasting. They came back. But then this was limited to the 5 major languages in Ghana. Later became 6 because they had added Hausa to it, since Hausa was an international language. So we had Twi, we had Ga, we have Ewe, we have Dagbani, we had Nzima, then of course Hausa, right? So that was Radio 1 then. Then of course they realized that since most Ghanaians were entering the middle class and we had a large constituency of educated people who could comfortably speak in English language, the Radio 2 also was actually established in GBC. Then during those times when the freedom fighters were agitating for political independence, there was a need for another station, and after we had won independence from the British colonial rule, and Kwame Nkrumah wanted to spread this kind of political fervor and zeal and that kind of spirit into African countries, there was a need for a third station, which was called the External Radio Station. That was established around 1958. So when it comes to GBC, we have what we call external radio stations. So we had the importation of other people who spoke other languages, international language like Portuguese, like French, like Spanish, to whip up this zeal for political emancipation and freedom in other African states. I mean, not surprising, right after Ghana had had its independence on the 6th of March 1957, other African countries, especially in 1960, also had independence, and largely because of what radio had actually done. Then GBC was able to actually monopolize the scene for more than, I guess, from 1936 right down to, that would be around about, yes, the mid-90s, well over half a century before the first radio station,
private
independence, because this happened after the 1992 Constitution, which allowed for the proliferation of the media. So a lot of media stations started springing up like carrots in every nook and cranny of the country, allowing people the freedom of speech and the freedom of the press, actually. And this one has actually guaranteed our political, deepened, strengthened, and widened the freedom of speech. That's why, interestingly, we have a whole chapter in the Constitution actually dedicated for freedom of speech. So that is where. But then, during those times, we had the British-run print media. The Graphic Corporation was the first one, followed by the Ghanaian Times. That also monopolized the print media for several years until other private media stations sprang up in the country. Today, as I speak, Accra alone has over 60 private radio and community stations, and all over the country we can count over 150 radio stations, some registered, some licensed, and still counting. We have several print media houses which also contribute towards the what they call it, the media space. And so that is historically where we have actually come from.
During the colonial era, Alfred, what was the process for selecting people who could read the news, and what were their conditions of service? Did the Brits provide them accommodation, and comparatively, were they taking their salaries in pounds? And how would you juxtapose that with current emoluments and remuneration status of the ordinary journalist?
I believe you have to take it by a case-to-case basis. I think, and I've read actually, that there were a few, Ghanaians who actually complemented the efforts of the British whites, colonists, who were then working at ZOY. We had a small group of technicians who were not broadcasters in the strict sense of the word.
Who was the first black indigenous Ghanaian to have been put on ZOY? Or that opportunity never was given? We were only peripheral technicians working on consoles.
We had technicians working on consoles, and those laying the lines, because that time we were using reed diffusion boxes, so that one reed diffusion box could be at Adabraka, and people within the environs or vicinity of Adabraka, say those living in Asalam Down, those living at Kanda, would all converge on one reed diffusion box. It was just like a football match. And at that time, it was said, interestingly, that the whites were suspected to be wizards and witches. And that how on earth could a human being squeeze himself into a small diffusion box? So indeed, that was the time they really confirmed and actually came to the satisfaction that indeed the white man was a witch. So how could he have spoken, a wizard, yes, spoken from a small box? What is a reed diffusion box? So during time of those times, about 6 p.m. or 12 midday, where the news was supposed to come from the British Broadcasting Corporation, you see people milling around and converging at where the reed diffusion box was.
So literally, the status of a journalist at that time was only to provide cheap labor.
Yes.
Just manpower.
Well, you will say so, but then at that time there were no live programs. All the programs were relayed from Britain to, or London to be specific, to Accra, right? And as time went on, there was the need to indigenize the Gold Coast broadcasting. So the Gold Coast broadcasting systems, by an act of parliament, was actually enacted, and the 5 journalists were sent outside Ghana, the Gold Coast then, where I will not readily be able to remember their names.
But they are all alive.
They are not alive. I mean, the last time we checked.
I'll be brash about this and blunt. Did they die poor?
I wouldn't say so. I mean, in those days, if you're a broadcaster, it was very prestigious, both you're economically well-to-do, and the joy and the satisfaction that came with the job far exceeded whatever monetary gains that you had. And at that time, the job was not as dangerous, as risky. The people did not actually put themselves in harm's way. The kind of bickering, the rancor, the bitterness, the suspicions, and unnecessary criticisms, counter-criticisms were not as deep and as wide as we have it now. Now things have changed. You asked me a specific question about whether it can be compared to today. No, definitely not, because the paradigm has shifted. Times have changed and have come a long way. 83 years is a long time.
Alfred, we're at GBC. We're on GTV right now. This wonderful edifice has been witness to so many tumultuous political occurrences. All the coups took place literally here. And what was the condition of the journalists in Ghana from 1966 pretty much through all the 5 military juntas we had?
I mean, I want to doff my heart for those journalists living and those who have joined the heavenly choir, that they actually sacrificed their lives. They were really committed and devoted to the job that they were doing. At times you hear stories, very harrowing stories, scary ones, about the kind of scary stories that they went through during coup d'etats, especially when during every coup, the coup maker had to come to GBC and make an announcement. The first coup on 24th February by Kotoka. I mean, he came through this gate. Yes, he came through this gate, did the announcement, and at that time, you could imagine if you were a news announcer and you were asked to read the news with a gun at your head. I mean, shivering and you having butterflies in your stomach or having cold chills down your spine is just an understatement. People were beaten with the butts of a gun, shoved under tables, kicked here and there, detained within the studios and in GBC for several times, and forced to read news announcements, which under normal circumstance they did not want to do. Some had to run helter-skelter. Some probably, I don't know who probably might have lost his or her life. But then the records did not talk about it.
Were there any journalists that had to live in exile, run away from Ghana?
Yes, there are some people. You know, our job is a sacrificial one, and you cannot guarantee your safety, especially when there were coup d'etats, because what happened was that any time a government comes into power, the Constitution talks about GBC educating, informing, and entertaining, sorry, I beg your pardon, the masses through its airwaves. And the first thing that they do is to publicize and advertise the agenda of government. Some of these things have been misconstrued as GBC always being at the beck and call of the government in power, or tied to the umbilical cord or the apron strings of that government, of the state. You see, what we should know is that GBC is a state broadcaster and a pseudo government entity. It's government that actually finances GBC. And as a matter of fact, he who calls the piper at times calls the tune. And some of these things have been misconstrued by politicians who, quote unquote, may be at the other side. And some journalists have borne the brunt of some of the excesses that came with some of these revolutions or militarization of the state during coup d'etats.
Which of the heads of states was harshest to journalists?
I wouldn't sit here.
Was Champon a cool guy?
I cannot sit here having not done any empirical analysis.
Alfred,
to say
we should rewrite history.
Yeah.
We see all the lofty things about Dr. Nkrumah, the first head of state, but people said he came down quite hard on broadcasters. Do you share in that opinion?
You see, I wish you didn't ask me that question, but I will endeavor and try to answer it. It's a difficult one. Nkrumah, as a historic figure, is an enigma, and most often than not, discussing issues about Nkrumah has been very contentious and controversial. Whereas some people see him as a democrat, some people see him as an autocrat who led an oligarchy full of dictators. Right? I'm not here to pass judgment or assess Kwame Nkrumah. I know that Kwame Nkrumah played a very vital and critical role when he stayed in the United States for 10 years. Upon his arrival, he was made the General Secretary of the UGCC. Then he defected and formed his own party, which is the CPP, after some misunderstanding between the leadership of the UGCC. Kwame Nkrumah himself was a journalist, if you care to know.
He was?
Yes, he was a journalist. He started this evening news, started publishing it, and the catchphrase of that newspaper was that, I'm not quoting, but let me paraphrase, that it's better to live in your country as a slave than to live in, you know that phrase, that to live under a lot of injustice. I mean, amongst the colonial government.
Okay. On this note, we go for a quick commercial break. Stick and stay with us. We'll be back shortly. Come back. We are still discussing challenges faced by the journalists in their line of duty, and we are privileged to have a very competent pair of hands, Alfred Hughes. I said, you're welcome back. You were a bit coy when I asked you about the level of accommodation Dr. Nkrumah had for journalists.
Yes, like I said, and I would like to emphasize that I cannot pass judgment on Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. Let the historians do that, and let posterity judge him. But what I would like to say emphatically is that Kwame Nkrumah is an international icon. He was born from a small village at Nkrofo, then later left for the United States of America, having studied widely in sociology, education, economics, and even did theology. And he came with an arsenal of knowledge, having learned and read voluminously from people like Marcus Garvey, Ezekiel Nnamdi, the Nigerian, probably later became the Nigerian president, who was also a journalist. So Kwame Nkrumah had that fervor. He had led a union of students who were agitating for African independence way back in London, where he wanted to go and do his, he started a profession, an academic. He didn't start a profession. In fact, he enrolled in a school to learn law, but then because of lack of funds, he had to abandon it and came to Ghana after Ako Kosa had met him when he was also pursuing a course in law, that he had met this very vibrant and robust Ghanaian who was unrepentantly political, and he wanted him to take over the job as a full-time General Secretary of the UGCC. There's some kind of controversy that Pa Grant actually funded his trip to Ghana. He gave him a car and actually, accommodated him to do the job. But because of differences in ideology, Kwame Nkrumah wanted independence now, whilst the UGCC wanted independence in the earliest possible time. So because of that, they split ways, and Kwame Nkrumah founded the CPP at Saltpond, right? Now in 1949, somewhere, I think in September,
okay.
If my memory serves me right.
I think, history books are quite replete with some of these things. Accounts.
But then his relationship with journalists. He was a journalist himself. He wrote the Evening News, and he was a caustic critic of the British colonial government. And he actually, he even made this word popular, that is bogus, that the British legislation was bogus, and there was another word that he used, and that he also talked about the fact that the intelligentsia and especially the chiefs will run away, one day run away and leave their sandals behind. All these things Kwame Nkrumah was writing, and that thing triggered the emotions, passions, sensibilities and sensitivities of the Ghanaian people to rather, that's why he had a lot of support. And something that even blew my mind was that when Kwame Nkrumah was standing for elections at Eshedu Keteke, now Ododo Odio, right, he was in prison when, what do you call it, it's not Kojobotio, the other one, Bedema, just sent him a form to fail to stand for that election, and he won overwhelmingly, hands down. So Kwame Nkrumah,
because of the op-eds and the write-ups.
Yes, the write-ups that he did. And when Kwame Nkrumah was even in prison at Usherford, do you know who was writing? He was writing through light provided by a street light that went through a chink hole into the prison, and he actually exchanged his meals for extra toilet roll from his prison mates, and that is where he was writing those write-ups for publication.
Okay, that's fine.
So that was the extent to which Kwame Nkrumah.
Let's go a little beyond Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. What is the portrait of the journalist today? Many go through GIJ, and surprisingly, reporters start off on a pittance as their salary. Some earn less than 500 Ghana cedis a month. How bad is the remuneration situation of a contemporary journalist?
It is relative. It is relative. You know, there's a proliferation of a lot of private media houses, and most of these people do not, excuse my language, go in for professionals who would charge economic prices for their compensations, right? So, and these times where, for the very first time, you hear of graduate unemployment, these schools churn out such journalists. And the schools, some of them, and most of them, are not even accredited. I have had the uncomfortable privilege of teaching in some of these journalism institutions, about 3 of them. I'm not going to mention the names for obvious reasons, which are not accredited.
But you were
and I left
drawing salaries.
Yes, I was drawing salary, and I left there on principle because they were not accelerating the effort of accrediting those schools. And anytime students graduated and they came out and they saw in the streets and they're not having jobs, they vented their spleen on you. Right, so I left there on principle. And most of these schools are there. So once they are not well paid, that is why it has led to the increase in what we call, quack journalists. They call them, it's a French name, paparazzi. You see them tramping from one event to the other, trying to draw what you call solid.
A paparazzo and a freelance journalist, when there are events and people are not invited, there are people who want to take shots and maybe they can make money from those shots.
But then, do you think they really, does the stories they do end at the editing bench? They don't. Most of them don't. So what they do is that they have this telephone, they call their friends, there's a program going on at, some do not even attend the program. They wait, and when it comes to the sharing of freebies, like food or money, they come and they show up and they mention all kind of weird names of media houses which do not even exist, right? Sometimes I've been to some of these programs, and some PROs have been very, very vigilant and have actually denied or refused some of these people some entry into the places. But then there are a few media houses, I don't want to mention their names, but Ghana Broadcasting Corporation is one of them, very credible, and that people do things journalistically, professionally, and they have the ID cards, they're identifiable, they carry the news, the information is actually gathered, the news analyzed, the information disseminated, and I do not think, and I have not heard the last time GBC was sent to court for either maligning, libeling, or scandalizing an individual or a group of people.
Let me ask a question you can't ask.
Yeah.
Are GBC broadcasters paid well? Are they okay across board?
Ibad, you want me to answer that question? I think it is relative. What is enough is relative. What is adequate is relative. What is woefully inadequate is relative.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So, what about insurance packages, health insurance packages? I can see there is a GBC clinic. Journalists and all kinds of reporters and cameramen and women, are they covered?
I think the current president of the Ghana Journalists Association, Dr. Ronald Afel-Money, is doing incredibly well. I know he has his critics. He's a human being. He may have his limits. Just recently, there was a program rolled out for journalists who
want accommodation. Estates so that they can buy parcels and plan their future.
Yes, Ghana has about 1.5 million deficit when it comes to housing listing. So I think that's a very human. And if you care to know, Ghana was voted as the first in the league table of countries who have actually done very well when it comes to press freedom. And I think they were either 27th or 37th in the whole world. And I think that's a mad improvement. But then we still have a very long way to go, especially with regards to some radio stations, television stations, highly politicized, because politicians themselves are actually establishing radio stations, and some journalists or presenters have been accused of becoming more political than the politician himself.
Okay. Yeah. On this political point, we announced our WhatsApp line. You can join the conversation by sending your WhatsApp messages to 055 61034 05555 61034. Okay, Alfred.
Yeah. So I think there should be some kind of sanitizing the media space. I think the National Media Commission.
Yeah, the NMC.
Yeah.
And not too long ago, some media houses were actually showing graphic footage late at night. Who watches the watchman, so to speak? Do they really work to regulate content, or you are free to put out there whatever you want as a media house?
I guess there are rules and regulations that guard and guide the showing of some of these films.
With accompanying punitive measures?
Yes, with accompanying punitive measures. Maybe they are not too popular. But then those times when we used to have the cinematography department of the Ministry of Information, every film was vetted before it was actually aired. So I'm asking this question. The Information Services Department, do they still have the cinematography department? And when was the last time they sanctioned any media house or cinema house? Do we still have cinema houses?
No, we don't.
Yeah,
They're all dead. Roxy and
yes, they're all dead. So now they have metamorphosed into some of these films that you watch in there's so much of them. I particularly do not understand why our airwaves is replete with a lot of Indian telenovelas, the Kumkum Badgers. You see, and when you say some of these things, those who watch will ask you, what does GBC show? But you also need to find out the mandate of GBC. It's supposed to actually unite the country through its culture. It's supposed to show more local films than foreign ones. You have been inundated. It's just like film industry colonization. You have been colonized by a lot of South American telenovelas, and this thing is seeping deep into our society and destroying them. A lot of divorces.
You attend weddings today and people are in Indian, gaps.
Yes, Indian gaps, and they use those words. Like Nigerian words like Tofiakwa. How many times did I say that? You see, they are all words which are couched out of these Nigerian films, and people are now not good afternoon to all Methodists at Gethsemane Methodist Church, South Mamprobi. Our pastor, very Reverend Dua, said that people are now solving their marital problems through what they watch in some of these telenovelas, instead of actually reading the Bible or listening to the Word of God, which should be at the center of every marriage. Now, when a character who is being dramatized uses a particular way of responding or reacting to some kind of misgivings in his or her marriage, they take the advice from what they watch, and it's having a very serious impact or influence on the way they act, the way people dress. You said it, that you remember Acapulco Bay. Now a dress came called Acapulco, which was a very shortish, very suggestive and kind of a manipulative type of dress, right? And all these things are coming. And if you watch one Indian film, do you know how much you make for the Indian government? About $1. And look at the number of people who sponsor such programs. And we talk about programs like sanitation, people littering the streets, and government with a cup in hand, moving from one country to the other, asking for money to do some of these million jobs. My God, for heaven's sake, this thing should not happen. Money should be put at very vital, critical, and sensitive areas that can transform and reform the country into a better one. Money should not be put into such some of these things, which at the end of the day actually destroy the ethical and the moral upbringing of the people, because the ethical and the moral upbringing of the people are the very core and the fundamentals to the building of a better future.
Alfred, if there is a heightened appetite for telenovelas, series and sitcoms, why don't we localize them? Instead of, doing voiceovers over Indian pictures, why don't we pump money into the Actors Guild? Why don't we pump money into the Ghana film industry? So that
at times, some questions can best be answered with questions. So what are the advertisers, about 23 on a particular telenovela, also doing? Can they also push those monies into the Kumawood? The Kumawoods, within 3 days, they are able to produce a film. They produce films just like a hen, hatches eggs. You understand me? And they are not quality. You can actually predetermine what is going to even happen next, and there's no quality. People who exit from the University of Ghana, having learned theater arts, end up putting up restaurants instead of becoming professional actors. And now you don't even hear of the popular ones again. They have the degrees, but are working with the civil service. So I don't know, there should be a policy, a very focused one, a very conscious one, determined, that can guarantee, I mean, the production of very professional films.
Okay, a few messages. I told you were a bit coy when I asked you about Nkrumah's, relationship with the press.
It was on purpose, yes.
Yes. And someone says, his name is Lami from Mataheko. He says, please, it's not Akukosa, but rather Akwaje, who brought Nkrumah to Ghana.
Yes, true.
And then this one says, I didn't hear you answer the question whether Kwame Nkrumah was good to journalists or not.
Yes, I said, and I'm going to repeat that.
Let me lump that up with this one. A very good evening to you. I'm Harry in Accra. May I ask if the copyright for past journalists' written and broadcast programs can be claimed by their families today for commercial purposes? Example, on Amazon. An example is the late Carlton Ishon, whose programs are broadcast by the BBC World Service today.
Yeah.
So
I didn't meet Carlton Ishon, but then I hear he was an broadcaster. I've listened to some of his voices. He died not too long ago, and I met some family members, the daughter to be specific, who wanted copies of the things that he did. And as a matter of fact, I took her to the library. Actually, he's married, the daughter is married to Eloy Amande, who was once a broadcaster at one of these multimedia houses. So, but I cannot really ascertain whether some of the programs that he did at GBC at that time is the ones which are being aired on BBC. I know he had a stint with BBC, and probably it's the programs that he produced at BBC which are still being aired there. I cannot actually put a finger on what the person is saying. The person can come again and be specific. Yes, and going back to...
let's take a quick commercial break. When we come back, you answer those questions. Stick and stay with us. You're welcome back. Just before we went on that break, we were reading some of your messages and Alfred was tackling them. And this is from one of our viewers, Alfred. He says, congratulations for being a credible station. He's talking about GBC. Okay. No wonder none of your workers have been held for contempt. Yeah. Keep it up. This came from Efo Yao from Afienya. Mm-hmm. Then this one also says, good evening. God bless you so much for such an insightful program. Concerning telenovelas, that's quite unfortunate. A whole national television, GBC, has also been manipulated into showing them. So which is which? Thanks. This came from Eben Kaswa Barrier. Does GBC show any telenovela?
Yes. You see,
you want to keep up with the Joneses?
We didn't say telenovelas are not generally good, right? We live in a global village, and we need to learn other things that come from other countries. When we were young, we were watching the Hawaii Five-O's, the Mosquat, a lot of Indian and cowboy films and other. I'm talking about the proliferation, the frequency, the times in which these things are shown. One day I was on leave, I was sitting in front of my house reading a book. And about a 7-year-old boy with a little brother were just crossing, going to school. And they were insulting one character in one of these telenovelas, I think Kunkumbaji or something. I said, this time you're going to school, you should be discussing your homework or something. You see, and you pass through a particular street in Accra, and it's like a communal meeting taking place. a television set of 14 each, be it black and white or colored, you see about 20, 25 people crammed around it, huddled around it, all watching this. And late in the night, and you see little children, some partially naked, at that time of the night, watching these films. You see, GBC shows it, but at what time does GBC show it? At what are the children awake when GBC shows it? Is it over the weekends? We are saying that we have a mandate, and our mandate is very clear that, I don't know the figures, about 70 or 75% of the film content should be local, because that should be the fulcrum with which unity of our culture, customs, and traditions should be there. But then we show a bit of foreign movies.
Back to journalist welfare.
Yeah.
Some people have said there is a culture of tyranny on the part of employers when it comes to the welfare of journalists. When the Ghana Medical Association has a problem, it runs to journalists. Media houses are able to sack dozens of people at a go. So, GJA, you've spoken quite, nicely about your colleague and friend, Dr. Afemoni.
Yeah.
Is it a strong union enough to protect the rights of journalists?
You see, we should be clear on certain things. GBC, GJA, like the word says, Ghana Journalists Association. It's an association.
It's not a union.
It's not a union. It is now that it is actually agitated. I don't know whether they've had it, the bargaining power. And what is a union? What is an authority? What is an association? It's different from what is an authority. Let's actually really understand some of these key words, because it is these words that underpin
then why pay
underline.
Why pay dues to GJA if it can't provide you succor in your time of distress?
I mean, we talk about dues. How much dues is paid? I don't quite remember. I think it's 5 cedis something, and it's not compulsory. We have thousands and thousands of journalists, but ask me, during the last elections, how many journalists were paid up members? You understand me? So I will take this opportunity. I'm not the president. I am a member, and as a responsible member, I will urge.
A member in good standing.
In good standing, yes. You can check the records because I voted. I mean, people should rally around and join and beef up the numbers, and let's have one voice.
Okay.
A voice that will be strong enough to actually ask for better conditions of service.
We'll be succinct with responses to some of these messages because they are trickling in.
Yeah.
He says, I'm Enoch from Ada. Now, what are the elders doing to continue what Nkrumah was doing? And this one says, and thank you for your insight, but what I meant was that most of the works by Carlton Ishon were actually published by the British Broadcasting World Service on Radio Ghana when he was actually working in Accra for the GBC. So could his copyright now be claimed by his family in Ghana?
Okay, all right.
Good evening. And anyhow, I love this program. My problem is the Nigerian movies. My people ask daily, just like that they behave in Nollywood movies. And like robbery, ashawo, business, slaps, gift to. Your message is not too clear. This came from Original Bobo in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands.
I think that's a story that you want to talk there about the fact that the themes and the subject matters are all centered on prostitution, juju, and the themes are the same. I know the Nigerians are very, very creative and innovative, because when you read Chinua Achebe, you read Wole Soyinka, and other books, you realize that the Nigerians have a very rich array of good folk tales and stories.
Is solely bribery?
Can I take that of the copyright thing?
No, take solely.
Yes, I take solely. Okay. it depends on what
and what is the
giver.
etymology of this thing, solidarity?
I think
how did it find its way into the journalistic lexicon in Ghana?
I think it is a jargon which root comes from solidarity.
So is it meant to entice people to give preference to certain slants and storylines and editorial policies?
Yes.
So it's bribery?
No, I said yes and no. It depends on the intention of the giver. It depends on the intention of the giver. If stories, if you go to a program, for instance, and we are not transported, and it's raining, like it rained today, so the event organizer says, get 20 Ghana cedis for transportation.
Isn't it the responsibility of the media house to cover all of that?
I'm telling you, some media houses are as poor as a church mouse.
Then why
they cannot find.
Why operate?
Yes, that is why the regulators would also have to actually do an audit of some of these media stations, hunt them down, and flush them out. You understand?
In furtherance of the rights of journalists, would you call for passing legislation to give a threshold salary or allowance a trained journalist should take?
That is
you know
why
some of them work for 2 straight days without any allowance?
Yes, of course. I don't have the
2
evidence.
2 straight years without any allowance.
That is what is being bandied around and speculated and rumored. I don't have the evidence, but I know some of them get as low as 200 Ghana cedis. Some have not been paid for several months, but they're still at work. So the managers of these, and some of these managers of these radio stations are big-time journalists who sit on radio and talk big and criticize things they shouldn't criticize. Meanwhile, they, down there, hypocritically do not pay their workers. So some of these things, I think that is why the bargaining rights to unionize the GJ is in the process. And I think when they're able to chalk these feet, it will go a long way to streamline the professionalism.
In wrapping up, Alfred Hughes, good work, someone says, why can't journalists also be conscious of some of the issues that they put out there, which normally would cause trouble?
Yes.
Why give us a daily dose of Party A says this, Party B says this, and inadvertently polarizing a whole country?
You know, journalism is based on certain principles, and the principles are simply truth, facts, balance, independence, fairness, unbiasedness, and other things. But because some people have eaten bloated food and tied the umbilical cords of their political masters, definitely, and we live in a country, our culture, Ghana, everything is politicized.
Okay, and this came from Zudana Azuda in Kumasi. The person says, I'm always worried and my heart bleeds when I put on my TV set and all I see is a pink man or a woman speaking Twi, voiceovers of telenovelas from India. It kills our movie industry, and I think the government must act critically to tackle this. And in conclusion, these are your closing remarks. How do you envisage the future of the journalist in Ghana? Some of you are bidding good riddance to the microphone and cameras and taking other professions. Does journalism have a future in Ghana, considering the low levels of remuneration?
The future of journalism in Ghana is bright, and the marks are on the wall. In Africa, we came first in terms of freedom of speech and of the press.
This is all time will permit us. So, all too soon, we've come to the end of another edition of The Issues, and we've been discussing, or we discussed, challenges faced by journalists in their line of duty in Ghana, and we've had in the studio Alfred Hughes, a broadcast journalist who has been in the business for well over 2 decades. Alfred, thank you for making time.
It's nice meeting you. It's a pleasure.
Okay, so we come your way next week with another edition. Stay blessed and keep watching GTV.